Welcome to Vision to Venture. I'm Eddie, and I'm here to uncover the realities of scaling and building a tech startup. Each week, I speak to leaders within the tech space with their insights and advice on how to found, fund, and frame a tech startup. So make sure to follow and subscribe to never miss an episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Vision to Venture. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Lawrence, co-founder and CTO of Neulight. Andrew is here to discuss his AI-driven platform that helps schools deliver personalized social, emotional, and behavioral support for students that follow the MTSS framework. This focuses on keeping students in class and is backed by data-driven support strategies. Hello, Andrew. How are you doing today?
Good, Eddie. How are you doing?
Yes, very well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me on Vision to Venture.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So to kick things off, you're obviously the co-founder and CTO of Neulight. Um, where you're building IntelliTier, an AI-driven platform for schools. Can you tell us what inspired you to move into the education technology space and what makes IntelliTier unique?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been motivated by like social good, specifically like AI for good. And it's kind of been like with me since childhood. Both of my parents were social workers, and that's actually how they met. And then my mother ended up getting her master's in education and went from a special ed teacher to director up to assistant superintendent. So kind of was always raised with this idea of, you know, giving back and trying to help like the next generation improve. My previous professional like jobs have been at like a satellite communication company and then AI deep tech startup in London. But my co-founder Jose called me one day with this idea for IntelliTier. It actually, the germ of the idea came from him speaking to his cousin, who is an assistant principal at a school in California.
Oh,
And
wow.
he just asked her what is her biggest problem? And he said that like teachers don't necessarily have the time or resources to like address like needs of the students within the classroom, specifically like when they're being very disruptive or disrupting the entire class for everyone, and they're sent to her office. But the MTSS framework, which you mentioned in the introduction, is like an evidence-backed framework that kind of gives strategies for teachers to be able to manage it within the classroom. But what we found really is like a lot of the training material for this is quite esoteric. There's also just not enough time to actually learn it or implement it with fidelity. So that's
Okay.
where we kind of got the idea for IntelliTier. Your second part of the question asking like what makes it unique is, well, I think there's really nothing that exists on the market to do this
Uh-huh.
right now. There are other tools around implementing MTSS, but not very much on the focus on behavioral and social emotional needs of students. So the general like idea of the product is to provide a single location for educators across the school to track specific social, emotional, and behavior events. Example of that might be disruption in class with the duration and the severity, or like disengagement from an activity, or something like anxiety or stress, which would be more on the social emotional side. Being able to track that in a single place and then using AI that has knowledge of the wider MTSS frameworks, the specific student context, and any resources and policies the schools might happen to create like a personalized intervention plan for that student.
So it's yeah, it sounds like it's definitely something that is like in this day and age really going to help with like the education system and students that are just going through obviously everything that they go through in school. It's a shame none of this was around when I was in school. So IntelliTier obviously helps schools implement like the multi-tiered system of supports, MTSS framework. Could you explain how this framework works and why it's important for improving student outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. So at on the, like a general level, it's made up of three tiers, tier
Mhm.
one, two, and three. And it's kind of like a pyramid where tier one is support that's available to all students. So like it's a classroom-based strategies, but everyone gets it regardless of need. And maybe an example of that would be like a classroom might implement like a token system. So if you do like if you raise your hand to speak before like to answer a question without like blurting out, maybe you get like a token. So say like a sticker or some mark. Once you get 5 tokens, you might get a break or time to go do something aside.
Mhm.
And that would be available to every student in the class, regardless of need. And then tier two is a bit more targeted. And this might be like 10 to 15% of students require it. This would be, you could do it individually. So like have other strategies for that student, maybe allow like a certain coping mechanism, like give them access to like a stuffed animal or something they typically have, or allow them like a task choice. So like we know that they typically act up when we switch from reading to math because the function of that behavior is maybe function being the reason for it is we know they're struggling in math. So like then they end up disrupting because they don't want to do the assignment. So you could give that person like a task choice being like, as opposed to doing this worksheet that everyone's doing, you can do this worksheet or that. So it's a bit more targeted. And then there's like tier three is like much more intensive support, and maybe that's like 1 to 5% of
Like
students.
really challenging students sort of thing.
Yep. And I
Yeah.
think yeah, your other part was why it's so important. One of the issues we went to this conference in California, the California MTSS conference, this is what it's called, in July, and we're speaking to a lot of educators just to try to learn more ourselves. Both myself and Jose are both from the tech industry, so like education is slightly new for us. So we're trying to obviously listen to potential users first and foremost. And they said that sometimes like students that end up acting up that in the general education class end up getting moved to special education even when it's not necessarily warranted, which you like don't need to do unless they specifically need this different type of curriculum. The other problem is that, like historically, there's been a lot of more punitive punishment. So student acts up, they might get detention. If it's really bad, they might get suspended. But if you suspend a student, you're now removing them from actual teaching time and slowing down their actual learning. So that's why it's quite important to keep as many kids as possible in the classroom. They obviously shouldn't be a disruption to the other students that are trying to learn, but as soon as you start pulling them out or moving them to other classes, you could potentially be impacting their education.
Yeah. That was actually kind of leading on to the next question as well, because obviously your
Mhm.
platform is designed to move away from punitive disciplinary measures in schools.
Mhm.
Um, and so obviously there's a focus on strategies to support students. How does IntelliTier help educators keep students in the classroom while minimizing those disruptions?
Yeah, so we would want the tool to be available to the teacher directly, like while in class. So I mentioned before that typically like teachers might not be fully aware of all of the strategies under the MTSS framework. There's one study we read where the majority of teachers in a in a scenario don't know what's the appropriate intervention.
Mhm.
So typically how it's kind of done historically is teachers might record behavioral events just on pen and paper, so do that like fully offline, and then if it gets to a certain severity level, schedule like a meeting with their support team, and then together draft an intervention plan for the student. Um, at that same conference, we spoke to some teachers that said that one teacher might have one strategy and another has another, and students go from one class to another and get conflicting instruction, which is obviously
Oh,
quite bad. So there's no single
yeah.
repository to keep this stuff. So the like our goal is that teachers are recording events, as live as possible. So like as they're happening, and then being able to suggest interventions then that they can implement. But that doesn't mean that anyone else at the school can't see it. So every user who should have access to that student, we're quite big on permission and data protection side. So it's not like every teacher at the school could see Bobby or something. It's just the ones that necessarily need it. So it provides a means to like asynchronously kind of collaborate on this stuff and know that like um, teacher A like has implemented this. I'll know that before I do anything in my class, stuff like that. So that's really the way is it's a tool that's available for them to immediately get help in defining these intervention strategies that they might not know on their own.
And so obviously, as you said, as you mentioned, that students can go from one classroom to another and get different, and teachers will do different things. Is it a case of like sort of when teachers start using this platform properly, then they can all sort of synchronize their disciplinary like things that they do,
Mhm.
and the way that they do things to sort of synchronize those students between classes as well.
Yep.
So it will just
So
sort of, yeah, go on.
yeah, so when you like on the platform itself, you would say go to I'll use Bobby again. I don't know how I said that name before. You go to Bobby's page and you'd see history of all social emotional behavior events. What we use is the ABC like paradigm for data collection. So that's
Okay.
antecedent, behavior, consequence.
Mm,
Antecedent is what was the preceding thing that caused that behavior. So I mentioned before it could be switching from what the topic is from reading to math. We know that Bobby might struggle with math, so then he ends up acting up. So uh, teachers will record that, but anyone who has access to Bobby's page would see all the events that are recorded. So it might be recorded by teacher A and teacher B. But then there's also a list of current interventions, what their status is. So you might have ran one. The literature suggests running these like bigger like tier 2 or tier 3 support plans for 6 weeks. So like it's not like something that they would do once. The classroom behavior ones in tier 1 that I was mentioning, those you typically have available for the whole school year. But something on the tier 2 or tier 3 would be a couple weeks long. So anyone
mhm.
who has access to Bobby's page would obviously see what current interventions are being implemented and what's the status. Anyone can open them, add comments, and kind of see how it's going over time.
And so one of the core features of IntelliTier is helping educators track behavioral data and collaborate on interventions. I'm assuming obviously this would mean teachers would be able to, as you just mentioned, see Bobby's page,
Yep.
and then I guess they can then collaborate together. So can you walk us through how that process works and how AI plays a role in suggesting effective strategies for
Mhm.
students?
Yeah. So I kind of defined maybe a bit of what you'd see on Bobby's page. Yeah, just to maybe summarize, you'd have a list of um, behavioral and social emotional events
Hmm.
over like all of time. Um, and yeah, the ABC paradigm, but also the severity and the duration. And what you end up kind of looking at is really the frequency of how long or how often it is happening. And then you see any prior interventions or ongoing interventions. But on that page, we also have an AI assistant that's knowledgeable of the MTSS framework and also any school specific policies or resources.
Hmm.
So one of the, I think we'll probably discuss this in a bit, but like one of the requests from some of the schools we're at already were means to provide their own like policy documents and stuff like that. Uh, so given the school specific like context or information about their policies, the historical information of Bobby and just the general MTSS knowledge, the user would be able to interface with this assistant to help draft intervention plan. So from there, it gets all of this information and would build a personalized plan with the user.
So, Dave, yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a really like where it is a really strong tool for teachers and educators to really sort of knuckle down, especially because I mean, yeah, especially nowadays, I feel like there are a lot of students and a lot of children that are a bit more challenging. Um, and I feel like maybe I don't know why that's the case, that they seem to be a lot more nowadays. Because I've got friends who are teachers and they always obviously talk about these challenging
Mhm.
kids. It seems like something like this kind of platform is really going to be able to help knuckle down on those types of children and be able to actually help them flourish in school rather than go down that route that's going to cause them to potentially get a word. Well, I don't want to say it's the wrong word, worse, but just a education not as good as those other kids that aren't challenged. It
Yeah,
could,
we obviously want to increase class time as much as possible to help
yeah.
learn academic, but also the necessary skills to succeed. That's the underlying goal. I'm not even sure if it is like the general population has shifted where there might be more kids that need support. I think part of the problem might actually be less resources are going to education and kind of unjustly so. Like every year,
Yeah.
classroom sizes are getting bigger, so the amount of individual teaching time that each student gets is less, so that could
And
really be like a
funding drops.
confounding effect. Sorry?
Yeah, I said funding drops as well
Oh yeah,
and
funding
things
drops,
like
yeah.
that. Well, I don't know about in the States, but I know it happens in the UK quite a lot,
Mhm.
which is another, yeah, obviously a massive factor. Like, but
Yeah,
it's
so like our
things like
goal
that, so it
obviously
makes no
is,
sense.
yeah, is help like providing better student support, but also like ideally the tool, um, and like this is, how we're iterating and like getting feedback should save teachers and administrators as much time as possible because their time is obviously limited. Resources are getting cut, so we want to make sure
Yeah.
everything's as fast for them as possible. Maybe one other anecdote I could actually mention. At that conference, I spoke with a teacher on special assignment in Huntington Beach. He's
Okay.
a math he was a math teacher and he used to teach 5 classes, but now he's the subject matter expert for MTSS at the whole school, and his workload went from 5 classes to four,
Oh my God.
which is still like crazy.
Wow.
And the only training he got was shadowing the previous person in the role. So, like, I asked, did you feel ready? And, like, the answer is obviously no. So, like,
Yeah.
it's not for a lack of trying or like a lack of care. It's really just the time and resources available, like, are don't meet the need. So, like, we really want to make sure we're building a tool to get valid support to the students and to help the educators get there as fast as possible because that's really the need.
Oh, wow. I just sort of going off what you've just said about feedback as well. With IntelliTier currently deployed in districts with over 25,000 students,
Mhm.
what kind of feedback are you getting from schools?
Yeah, it's been positive and like raising like additional needs. So I mentioned before, Jose and I really wanted to get it in the hands of users as fast as possible. So what we have been doing this academic year was offering a free pilot program. So schools that just wanted to try it, we would deploy it for free. And you can try it across your school. We'll onboard whatever teachers you want, help with the loading of the students. And yeah, we've gotten positive feedback on really a lot of the interface and the customizability. So I mentioned means to track like behavioral events, and we have like a predefined form to fill out to kind of make that easier, but that's fully customizable for the schools. So like a behavior event could say like disruption, disengagement, speaking out, fighting, all of these things, but like the schools have the ability to edit that, add new ones, add like fully customizable for their specific needs.
Mm.
I mentioned a bit earlier that one of the schools mentioned they wanted to inform the AI of what their school-specific policies and resources are. So that was something we didn't have when we first deployed, and we're building it now. But that's exactly kind of what we're looking for. We want to figure out what are the needs that we're not meeting with IntelliTier and really improve the product over this current academic year.
So it's really like it's well, just based on what you've just said, it like very customizable for the teachers, which is obviously great because I guess no classroom is the same, right?
Mhm,
So they can literally sort of tailor it specifically to their needs and their class and the students that they have and any specific, because I feel like nowadays there's so many different types of challenges that kids have to face way more than when I was in school or maybe when you was in school that things have just come like I just feel like there's a lot more different things that are causing kids to act out. I feel
mhm,
like now that sort of things like anxiety and things like that have been spoken about so much more and it's
mhm,
been sort of now these kids like the kids nowadays in school are like also having spells of anxiety and things like this. It's making them
mhm,
challenging. Sounds like the IntelliTier is really sort of adaptable to that sort of thing, and they
mhm.
can implement their own sort of ways to overcome those sorts of challenges. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah,
That's
and we'll
amazing.
give you the recommendations to help address them. So typically there might be some social emotional response, say like anxiety, but then that ends up manifesting as some specific behavior, right?
Yeah,
So
and
like,
they
yeah.
lash out and cause disruption. Exactly.
Mhm,
Amazing. So the education sector, It can be slow to adopt new technology. What have been some of the challenges in getting schools on board with an AI-driven platform, and how have you addressed them?
Yeah, to be fair, actually, the AI side of it hasn't caused too many issues.
Oh,
I
good.
think so, like, kind of the current like Gen AI chatbot wave started about 2 years ago with like ChatGPT 3.5. And I think teachers actually seem quite excited about it. But where there's problems is on the data protection side. So like you cannot
Really?
open ChatGPT and give any identifying information about students. And if it's a student that's like potentially been diagnosed with autism or ADHD, that's now a medical diagnosis.
Yeah.
And in the US, medical information is protected by like HIPAA. So you have to be HIPAA compliant platform. And any student specific information in the US is like FERPA compliance. So like a public like ChatGPT has none of these protections. And even on the free tier, they take the information you put in and use it to train the model. So like schools cannot use that at all. Um, but I think teachers are quite excited about just anything that can save them time, make their jobs easier. So like we haven't had much pushback at all really on the AI component. We have our own private deployment of the model, like our databases are all encrypted at rest and stuff. So like we are like FERPA compliant. I think where we've probably had more challenges is just around um, the like academic schedule. So a lot of like teachers and administrators take a longer holiday over the summer, right? So it was a bit quieter time. We went to the conference, but we're also trying to work on the product, and then maybe just a bit of processes as well. So like one of the schools, we had a bit of like a firewall issue. Well, that's not necessarily a process. It's more like on the maybe logistics side. So some schools have different IT systems, so making sure that our platform is navigatable to it on their network.
Hmm.
Um, like one of the schools, we have our own like privacy policy and stuff, but we had to tailor some things to there. So red tape isn't the correct word, but obviously, like with any like public sector government stuff, they always have their processes that you have to kind of follow.
Yeah, hoops to jump
But
through.
yeah, yeah, I wouldn't say anything's been super bad. And but how we've addressed it actually as well is I think just speaking to people in person, that conference was really great. Actually, we like demoed the platform to people live and they got a lot of very excited. You can also book a demo with us on our website. So
Right.
myself or Jose have been doing a lot of that and just showing how the platform works to people
Yeah,
seems to get them very excited. And that seems
yeah.
to be the best way to get over any hurdles.
It's yeah, I mean, I feel like with that sort of thing, especially, I mean, I don't know about teachers in the US, but I feel like sometimes teachers can be a bit like like restricted from trying these new sort of things and new ways
Mhm.
to like and new systems that get implemented and things like that. I feel like demos are obviously going to enable them to be like, oh wow, actually, you know what, this is something that could really work.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. There's actually, yeah, a huge push for teachers to do more data collection. And there's this quite funny trend on TikTok. You can find a bunch of like memes of teachers complaining about data collection or like they do it, but then nothing happens. So like, yeah, we've been able to show like you can collect it and then use it for like these suggestions on how to support the student further. So that's
yeah,
quite nice to show like a tangible outcome of
yeah,
potential data collection work they're being asked to do. But yeah, obviously with like any new technology, people like it's hard to get people to adapt. So it's kind of really showing the benefit of it that I think will help.
yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. Um, And so in the future, how do you see AI transforming the education system more broadly? And what role do you hope IntelliTier and Newlight will play in that transition?
Yeah, more broadly, I see it in a lot of areas actually. I think there's quite a lot of companies working more on the curriculum and learning material generation side. Um, I believe there's some working on like grading, so students would submit their work and maybe have some AI capability to to do an initial pass and suggest grades, and then maybe teachers accept or edit it a bit. I see like Newlight and IntelliTier. So yeah, just to make sure the language is quite clear, IntelliTier is our first product, and Newlight is the company name. And I don't see like IntelliTier being very static or being our only product either. We're very focused on the behavioral and social emotional needs of students under the MTSS umbrella right now. One of the other pillars is academic. So like you could be seeing how kids are doing with grades and you want to intervene before they potentially fail a class. So I could see us supporting it there quite well. We mentioned about, I guess, the evidence back portion of MTSS. And like what that means is they show when schools implement it with fidelity. That's being like the key really hard thing, how to implement it with fidelity. I don't think anyone has probably gotten it perfectly. Um, that like the key metrics the schools are themselves graded on. So let's say like attendance, grades, whether in standardized tests or just regular graduation rates, improve. So it has a material
Yeah.
impact on that. Um, so on the budget side of things, that's actually a lot of the things that go into whether or not the schools are like getting more or less budget is like how well they're performing. So how we would hope IntelliTier would be able to help to this is show a material impact on the key metrics the schools are graded by, and then they'd be eligible for more budget next year because they're improving. So that's like on the school side, but the real, motivation and purpose is if all of those key metrics are improving for schools, then that means like students are actually graduating with the knowledge and skills that they need to succeed. So that's how really hope that IntelliTier has an impact in the education space.
And so for other tech leaders or researchers looking to apply their AI knowledge in areas like education,
Mhm.
what advice would you give about making that transition and creating real world impact?
Yeah, I think probably what holds true for like any product or service is you really have to understand your users.
Hmm.
And one of like the very common first use cases of like this generative AI was like coding copilots. So
Hmm.
like a software developer would have a copilot that might like help them write code. And one could see like what we're doing with IntelliTier very similar as we're helping like teachers, administrators, educators write an intervention plan. But how like those users interact with a software system is very much different than a software developer, right? So like you can't take the paradigms and user experience that might work really well for a software developer and apply it to a teacher. You really have to understand who your ideal user persona is, like who the end user is.
Hmm.
Um, so like we try to very much and very frequently like get feedback from them, hold sessions like where we demonstrate some new capability or ask them to use the platform and watch and kind of see where they might stumble, where there's a clear gap in things. So I think for anyone, it's about understanding your users. The other key thing on the education side is really the data protections and like security compliances. So I mentioned FERPA as well. There's another uh, like compliance that you need if like students themselves are actually on the platform. I don't remember what the acronym is because our product is tailored towards, teachers and stuff, but like if you have kids on a software tool, that also has to be protected under something else. So really make sure you're quite diligent on these more legal aspects of the space as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because that can definitely come back and bite you somewhere you don't want to be bitten. So yeah, always make sure all the legal stuff is all sorted. And then, so just finally to wrap this episode up, obviously, I'm sure there's a lot of plans for the future. And so, looking ahead, what's
Mhm.
next for New Light and IntelliTier? I feel like this platform can go so far, and can definitely say it's probably needed in the UK. So, are there any exciting developments or like features in the pipeline that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, so maybe the first thing I mentioned was kind of this this free pilot we're doing with schools. That was still very much like us having to reach out or like set it up specifically. And I think by the time that this publishes, we'll have like a free sign up on our website. So you would just use your Google account to log in, actually. So it's like a single sign-on solution. The caveat would be, as opposed to it being like a school that multiple users all can see, it just allows you to try the tool. So it would make a mock school. So if you did it, it would be called Eddie's school. It would have
Mhm.
one student, but you could add new students, and you can just try everything in the platform, really. So that's probably what I'm most excited about, is just getting more people onboarded to give it a try.
Yeah.
Um, and then we've very much been focused right now on like how do we efficiently support this student. So you're on like what Bobby's page, and then you want the AI to assist you in how do I support the student. But the other side of it is like at the school level, like which students need which levels of support. So you're helping Bobby, but you know Bobby needs support, but there could be like Susie who you're tracking stuff, but like it hasn't been notified to anybody yet that like she needs to be moved to tier two or something to that effect. So kind of the current support of a current student is quite good, but being able to float up that like we need to move this other person. So it's not on the user to like push for that. It's on the platform to suggest to them that like Susie, Danny, and Steven all should get additional attention, kind of. Um, and then maybe some smaller things to like better analytics to track how interventions are going, making sure like they're having a positive impact. I mentioned that, yeah, typically you want to run the tier two or tier three for 6 weeks. So really tracking the progress of that over time. Um, and just better like user experience with the AI. I mentioned before a bit of like, yeah, how a software developer interacts with a copilot versus a teacher is quite different. And we want to kind of move a bit away of like the raw like chat functionality and kind of embed it a bit more in the actual planning. So you can imagine having like a template of a plan and you're just filling in specific sections or helping lead the user in the conversation. So like suggesting how to move on without them having to kind of own a lot of the conversation.
Amazing.
Thank
And
you.
do you think there is any plans of like outside of the US? Do you reckon you'll ever
Um,
expand that far?
I I think so. Unfortunately, I don't think MTSS is that ubiquitous in the UK.
No,
It
yeah.
is,
Yeah. They'll probably have to
but
do other things.
there's probably similar frameworks or strategies. I know it is international though. It's not just in the US. But right now, yeah, we're quite focused on the
Just
US,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
because I also mentioned the FERPA compliance, so that's just like a US one. So like if we were to expand internationally, we'd have to look
Need
at
to
what
change all
are the
of that.
requirements
Yeah,
there.
exactly. So maybe far in the future that can be, but first, I mean, let's face it, the US is absolutely ginormous. So you've got a lot to do
Yeah,
there
and
first.
California itself has 6 million K through 12 students. So
God, insane.
we're focused on US K through 12 schools right now.
I feel like there's probably only 6 million kids in the UK alone. Like the
The
entirety there.
Yeah, the other thing too is like these strategies are not just necessary for schools. One of our advisors also works in the juvenile detention system, so you
Okay.
could imagine using it there as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
100%. Yeah.
mhm,
So it's usable in more ways than one, which is fantastic.
mhm.
Amazing. It sounds absolutely fantastic. It sounds like an incredible platform that is actually going to have an impact on, well, the education system in the States, which is amazing. So thank you for sharing all of that with me, Andrew. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Vision to Venture. And it's been, yeah, really, really interesting learning about IntelliTier and everything that you guys do at New Light. So thank you. And all of us at Enigma wish you the absolute very best for whatever the future holds for New Light and IntelliTier.
Thank you so much. Thanks again, Eddie. It's been great speaking with you, and thank you for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Vision to Venture. If you're listening, make sure to give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching, like and subscribe to listen to more inspiring stories from leaders in the tech space.